I'm Hazel Weber, 32, a financial advisor who's been sending my mother Eleanor $2,500 monthly to help clear her mountain of debt. The white colonial house with blue shutters I grew up in meant everything to me, which is why I agreed to help. Never did I imagine my own mother and brother Brian would betray me after everything I sacrificed. When they told me to leave, I smiled knowingly. Before I tell you why that moving day became my greatest triumph, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button to join me on this journey of family betrayal and unexpected victory. Growing up in Oak Ridge, a middle-class neighborhood in suburban Michigan, life wasn't exactly the picture-perfect childhood you see in movies. My father died when I was just 6 years old, leaving my mother Eleanor to raise my older brother Brian and me alone. Our modest home became both our sanctuary and the backdrop for a family dynamic that would shape my entire life. From an early age, it was clear that Brian was the golden child. Despite his mediocre grades and tendency to quit everything he started, my mother showered him with affection and praise. "Your brother just needs extra encouragement," she would say whenever I questioned the imbalance of attention. Meanwhile, my straight A's and academic achievements were treated as expected rather than celebrated. I threw myself into academics, partly out of natural inclination but mostly because it was the one area where I could shine without competition. By high school, I was working part-time at the local library, saving every penny I could while maintaining a perfect GPA. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Winters, became the supportive figure my mother never was, helping me apply for scholarships and encouraging my dreams beyond our small town. "You have a natural talent with numbers," Mrs. Winters noted during my junior year as she reviewed my college applications. "Financial planning might be perfect for you." All the while, Eleanor's financial situation grew increasingly precarious. Credit card bills would arrive in bright red envelopes. Collection calls became so common that I started answering the phone with prepared excuses. Brian, 3 years my senior, cycled through community college courses without completing a degree, living at home and contributing minimally to household expenses. When I left for State University on a full academic scholarship, the taste of freedom was intoxicating. No more walking on eggshells, no more being the responsible one in a house of chaos. During those 4 years, I visited homes sparingly, each trip revealing further deterioration in both the house's condition and my mother's financial situation. After graduating summa cum laude with a degree in finance, I secured a position at Meridian Financial in Chicago. Starting as an assistant advisor, I quickly proved my worth and began building a client base. My tiny apartment and secondhand furniture were points of pride, evidence of independence earned through hard work rather than handouts. Back home, Eleanor's situation continued its downward spiral. At 52, she married Gerald, a charming man with expensive taste and poor credit. The marriage lasted less than 2 years, but added significantly to her debt. Medical issues, arthritis, and high blood pressure that she attributed to stress led to unpaid hospital bills and prescription costs. Brian, now 35, remained unemployed and fully dependent on our mother. His brief stints at retail jobs never lasted, always ending with stories about unreasonable managers or toxic workplaces. He had become an expert at avoiding responsibility while maintaining the role of devoted son. It was during a rare Sunday phone call that Eleanor broke down, confessing the full extent of her financial troubles. "The bank is threatening foreclosure, Hazel," she sobbed. "I don't know what to do. Your brother tries to help, but you know how hard it's been for him to find stable work." Despite the years of emotional distance, my heart ached at the thought of losing our family home, the last physical connection to my father, and the few happy memories of my childhood. After the call, I sat in my apartment, staring at my own carefully managed finances. I had been saving for a down payment on a condo, a goal now within reach after 5 years of disciplined budgeting. When I shared the situation with my boyfriend Travis during dinner that night, his reaction was measured. "I understand wanting to help your mom," he said carefully, "but from everything you've told me, this sounds like a pattern. What happens after you bail her out this time?" Travis had met my family only twice, but his observations had been unervingly accurate. A child psychologist with keen insight, he had noticed the dynamics immediately. How Eleanor subtly undermined me, how Brian expected to be catered to, how I shifted into a caretaker role almost unconsciously. This time would be different, I insisted. I could set up a formal arrangement. Use my financial expertise to actually fix the situation, not just put a band-aid on it. Travis squeezed my hand supportively, but couldn't hide his skepticism. Just make sure you protect yourself, Hazel. Your compassion is one of the things I love most about you, but your family has a history of taking advantage of it. Those words would prove prophetic in ways neither of us could have imagined. After a week of careful consideration, I arranged a video call with Eleanor to discuss her financial situation in detail. For once, she seemed willing to be transparent, perhaps because desperation had finally outweighed pride. The numbers were worse than I had anticipated. Credit card debt totaling $43,000 spread across 6 cards, all with interest rates above 22%. Medical bills amounting to $27,000, some already in collections. The mortgage had fallen behind by $9,800, and the remaining balance was approximately $110,000. All told, she was drowning in nearly $180,000 of debt, with a monthly income of just $2,200 from her part-time administrative job and early Social Security benefits. I've been robbing Peter to pay Paul for so long, Eleanor admitted, her once vibrant face now lined with worry. I never wanted you to know how bad it got. As a financial advisor, I knew exactly how precarious her situation was. Bankruptcy would provide relief from some debts, but could jeopardize the house. Debt consolidation would barely make a dent given the interest rates she was facing. The clearest path forward would require significant financial intervention. I can help, I said finally. I can send you $2,500 monthly to systematically tackle these debts. We'll start with the mortgage arrears, then the highest interest credit cards, then the medical bills. Eleanor's relief was palpable, her gratitude seemingly genuine. Hazel, I don't know what to say. This is so generous. I do have one condition, I continued carefully. The house. Once the debts are paid, I'd like it transferred to my name. It's a significant investment for me, and honestly, it's the only way I can justify putting my own financial goals on hold. There was a moment of hesitation before Eleanor nodded. Of course, that makes perfect sense. After all, your brother has never shown interest in taking over the property, and it would be a relief knowing it stays in the family. We verbally agreed that I would begin sending money immediately, with the understanding that after the major debts were cleared, we would formalize the house transfer. It wasn't the most businesslike approach, but pushing for legal documentation immediately felt unnecessarily adversarial. After all, this was family. That night, I recalculated my 5-year financial plan. The monthly payments to Eleanor would delay my down payment savings by at least 3 years. The vacation to Italy that Travis and I had been planning would need to be scaled back to a domestic trip. My emergency fund would remain untouched, but the additional investments I had planned would be on hold indefinitely. Travis supported my decision but insisted on one safeguard. At least email your mom summarizing the arrangement. Create some record of the agreement, even if it's not legally binding. I followed his advice, sending Eleanor a detailed email outlining our arrangement and her verbal agreement regarding the house. Her reply was brief. Thank you, sweetie. This means the world to me. Over the next 6 months, our monthly video calls took on a new dimension. I created a shared spreadsheet tracking each debt payment, watching with professional satisfaction as balances decreased. Eleanor's mortgage was now current, and 2 of the smaller credit cards had been paid off completely. You look better, Mom, I noted during one call. The constant worry that had aged her prematurely seemed to be lifting. I feel like I can breathe again, she admitted. The collection calls have stopped. I actually answered the phone yesterday without panic. Brian occasionally appeared in the background during these calls, offering casual waves, but never joining the financial discussions. When I asked Eleanor if she had shared our arrangement with him, she was vague. He knows you're helping, but I didn't get into specifics. You know your brother doesn't have a head for numbers. By the 1-year mark, significant progress had been made. The medical bills had been negotiated down and paid off. 4 of the 6 credit cards were at zero balances. The mortgage payments were consistently on time, with occasional extra payments toward principal. All told, we had eliminated nearly $90,000 of debt. My own life had adjusted to the new financial reality. Travis and I had postponed moving in together, as my current apartment was significantly cheaper than a place that would accommodate us both comfortably. Instead of the Italian vacation, we spent a long weekend in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. My wardrobe consisted entirely of last season's clearance finds, and lunches were always packed from home. "I'm proud of you," Travis said one evening as we reviewed my budget for the upcoming month. "But I worry you're sacrificing too much for people who have never prioritized your well-being." I dismissed his concern, bolstered by the tangible progress in Eleanor's financial situation. "It's working exactly as planned. Another year, maybe year and a half, and the major debts will be cleared. Then we can talk about the house transfer." The satisfaction of applying my professional expertise to help my family outweighed the sacrifices. Each debt eliminated felt like healing an old wound, repairing a relationship damaged by years of emotional distance. For the first time in my adult life, my mother was expressing regular gratitude and acknowledgement. What I couldn't see then was how quickly everything would change. The first hint that something had shifted came 9 months into our arrangement. During our monthly video call, I noticed a large flat-screen TV on the wall behind Eleanor, definitely new and definitely expensive. "That's quite an upgrade," I commented, trying to keep my tone neutral. Eleanor's smile faltered slightly. "Brian found such a good deal. We couldn't pass it up. Black Friday sale." It was April. "I thought we agreed any major purchases would be discussed first," I said carefully. Our arrangement had included a detailed budget for living expenses, with any excess going toward debt repayment. "It's just a television, Hazel," Eleanor replied, a familiar defensiveness creeping into her voice. "We're allowed some small comforts after all the belt-tightening." I let it go, chalking it up to a one-time indulgence. But during my surprise visit the following month, a detour on my way to a financial planning conference in Detroit, I discovered more evidence of lifestyle inflation. New furniture in the living room, kitchen appliances still in boxes, shopping bags from upscale department stores. When confronted, Eleanor became evasive. "These are just a few things to brighten up the place." Brian thought it would be good for my mental health to update our surroundings. Brian, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. "You can't expect Mom to live like a monk just because you're helping with some bills. She deserves quality of life, too." "Some bills?" I repeated incredulously. "I've paid off nearly $100,000 of debt while putting my own life on hold." "Nobody asked you to put your life on hold," Brian countered. "And nobody asked you to be so controlling about it either. This is still Mom's house, not yours." The pointed emphasis on ownership wasn't subtle. When Eleanor left to make coffee, Brian leaned in closer. "Listen, I know what you're doing. Trying to guilt Mom into giving you the house as some kind of payback. If you're only helping to get something in return, maybe you should stop now." Before I could respond, the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Kenneth Williams, a man Eleanor introduced as a special friend. In his mid-60s, with a carefully maintained salt and pepper beard and designer glasses, Kenneth had the easy charm of someone accustomed to making good impressions. Throughout dinner, I learned that Kenneth and Eleanor had been dating for nearly 3 months. He owned a consulting business that was vague in specifics, but apparently allowed for a flexible schedule and frequent travel. Brian seemed unusually enthusiastic about the relationship, laughing at Kenneth's jokes and repeatedly mentioning how happy Eleanor had been since meeting him. After returning to Chicago, I did something I'm not proud of. I ran a background check on Kenneth Williams. My concerns were validated when I discovered a history of tax liens, a bankruptcy filing 7 years prior, and a trail of civil judgments for unpaid debts. Kenneth wasn't just financially unstable. He had a pattern of leveraging relationships for monetary gain. During our next video call, I attempted to broach the subject delicately. "Mom," I'm a little concerned about Kenneth's financial situation. Have you discussed money matters with him? Eleanor's expression hardened immediately. You ran a background check on him? How dare you invade his privacy like that? I'm just trying to protect you and our progress, I explained. His financial history shows some concerning patterns. The past is the past, Eleanor dismissed. Kenneth has been nothing but supportive of me. Unlike some people, he doesn't attach strings to his affection. The implication stung. The only string I've attached is asking that we follow a financial plan to get you out of crippling debt. A plan you agreed to. The call ended tensely, with Eleanor promising to think about what I'd said. 2 weeks later, she informed me that Kenneth had moved in to help with expenses. No details were provided about his financial contribution, and I knew better than to ask. As suspicion and unease grew, I consulted with Raymond Delgado, a lawyer friend who specialized in family law and estate planning. Over lunch at a cafe near my office, I explained the situation in detail, the verbal agreement, the significant payments, the changing dynamics. So, you've been sending your mother $2,500 monthly for over a year based on a verbal promise that you'll eventually get the house. Raymond summarized, his expression concerned. And an email exchange confirming the arrangement, I added weakly. Raymond sighed. Hazel, from a legal standpoint, this is problematic. Without a written contract specifically outlining the terms, that these payments are essentially a loan or an advance on purchasing the property, a court would likely view them as gifts. But that wasn't the intention, I protested. Intention doesn't always matter in legal situations, he explained gently. My advice? Either get a proper deed transfer in process now or stop the payments until she agrees to formalize the arrangement. Otherwise, you're throwing good money after bad with no legal protection. I left our meeting determined to address the situation directly. That weekend, I called Eleanor with a straightforward request. We needed to begin the process of transferring the house deed into my name or creating a legally binding agreement about the eventual transfer. Her response was a masterclass in avoidance. First came health excuses. I've been so overwhelmed with these new medications. Then administrative delays. The mortgage company requires all these documents I need to find. And finally, emotional deflection. I can't believe you don't trust me after all these years. When pressed, Eleanor finally admitted the truth. Brian thinks we should wait until all the debt is completely cleared before making any legal changes. Just to be safe. Safe for whom? I asked, already knowing the answer. The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. The betrayal had begun long before I recognized it. The confrontation I had been dreading finally erupted during my next visit home. I had arrived unannounced on a Saturday morning, determined to have a face-to-face conversation about the house transfer. Instead, I walked into a scenario that seemed orchestrated for maximum impact. Eleanor, Brian, and Kenneth were seated at the kitchen table, the same table where my father had helped me with homework, where I'd opened my college acceptance letter, reviewing what appeared to be renovation plans. Hazel, Eleanor exclaimed, hastily gathering the papers. We weren't expecting you. Clearly, I replied, setting down my overnight bag. What's all this? Brian stepped in before Eleanor could respond. Home improvements. Is that a problem? It might be, considering I've been funding the mortgage and debt payments with the understanding that this house would eventually be mine. The tension in the room crystallized instantly. Brian stood, his expression darkening. So the truth comes out, he said, his voice low and accusatory. You're not helping Mom out of the goodness of your heart. You're trying to steal her house right out from under her. Steal? I repeated incredulously. I've sent over $40,000 with the explicit agreement that... Agreement? Brian interrupted. You mean taking advantage of Mom when she was desperate? Forcing her to promise her home to you in exchange for help any decent daughter would provide unconditionally. Eleanor remained silent, her eyes downcast, while Kenneth placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. The choreography of their response felt rehearsed, as if they'd been waiting for this confrontation. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, you know that's not what happened. We discussed this arrangement at length. You agreed it was fair. When Eleanor finally looked up, the coldness in her eyes was unfamiliar. Maybe I felt I had no choice at the time. But now that I'm thinking more clearly, it seems opportunistic on your part. The word hit like a physical blow. 2 years of financial sacrifice, of putting my own dreams on hold, reduced to opportunism. What about your medical condition? I asked, suddenly remembering another justification for my financial support. You said the stress was exacerbating your health problems. A flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, crossed Eleanor's face before Brian interjected. Mom's doing much better now. Thanks for asking. Kenneth has been incredibly supportive. His natural remedies have done wonders for her blood pressure. The implication was clear. My financial support might be useful, but Kenneth's presence was what truly mattered. I left shortly after. The renovation plans, which I later learned were for converting the basement into an office for Kenneth's consulting business, still spread across the kitchen table. Back at my hotel, I called Travis, struggling to maintain composure as I recounted the encounter. They're gaslighting you, he said firmly. This is financial abuse, plain and simple. They're rewriting history to justify taking your money while denying the agreed-upon exchange. The next morning, I walked around my childhood neighborhood, trying to clear my head. Outside the local grocery store, I ran into Martha Lindholm, our neighbor for over 20 years. Hazel, what a lovely surprise! Martha exclaimed, embracing me warmly. Are you in town for the big renovation? What renovation? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Martha's enthusiasm was innocent but revealing. Your mother's been telling everyone about the plans to convert the basement into an office space for Kenneth's business. Apparently, it's going to be quite extensive, new entrance, bathroom, the works. She mentioned you were helping fund it as an investment in their future. Each word was another twist of the knife. Not only was Eleanor misusing my financial support, but she was also publicly misrepresenting my involvement to justify the expenditure. That afternoon, I returned to the house for a final attempt at resolution. This time I was direct. We need to formalize our arrangement now, I stated calmly. Either we begin the process of transferring the deed, or I'll need to stop the monthly payments. The ultimatum hung in the air for a long moment before Eleanor responded, tears welling in her eyes. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? With threats and conditions? If you really loved me, you wouldn't put a price tag on helping your own mother. It was emotional manipulation, transparent and effective. Despite recognizing the tactic, I felt the familiar guilt rising, the lifetime of conditioning that prioritized Eleanor's feelings over my own needs. This isn't about love, I managed to say. It's about honoring our agreement. I've upheld my end faithfully for 2 years. Brian, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. You know what your problem is, Hazel? You've always been jealous of my relationship with Mom. This whole financial savior act is just your way of trying to buy her affection. The accusation was so absurd, so contrary to reality, that I actually laughed a short, disbelieving sound that seemed to infuriate Brian further. You think this is funny? You're trying to leave Mom homeless in her golden years, and you're laughing about it. Homeless? She has a home because I've been preventing foreclosure for 2 years. Eleanor began to sob loudly, prompting Kenneth to step in. I think you should leave, Hazel. You're clearly upsetting your mother, and that's the last thing her blood pressure needs right now. As I drove back to Chicago that evening, a text message from Brian arrived. Don't bother sending any more money. We don't need your help or your conditions. Yet the following month, when I didn't send the usual payment, a panicked call came from Eleanor. The mortgage company called again. Are you really going to abandon us like this? The cycle of manipulation was so transparent, it would have been comical if it weren't so painful. At work, my performance began to suffer. During a particularly difficult day, my boss Patricia noticed my distraction. Everything okay, Hazel? You haven't seemed yourself lately. In Patricia's office, the professional facade I'd been maintaining crumbled. I confessed the entire situation, the financial support, the broken promises, the manipulation. Patricia listened without interruption, then asked a simple question. What would you advise a client in this situation? The answer was immediate and clear. To protect themselves legally. To stop enabling financial dependence without proper safeguards. Then why aren't you taking your own professional advice? She asked gently. It was the perspective shift I needed. That evening, I called Raymond again, this time with a different question. What legal options do I have to protect the investment I've already made? The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a conciliatory family dinner. After weeks of tense phone calls and ultimatums from both sides, Eleanor had suggested we come together to work things out like family. Travis had offered to accompany me for support, but I declined, hoping that privacy might allow for more honest conversation. That hope evaporated the moment I arrived at Rosetta's, an Italian restaurant that had been reserved for family celebrations throughout my childhood. Eleanor, Brian, and Kenneth were already seated, an untouched basket of breadsticks between them. The forced smiles and overly enthusiastic greetings couldn't mask the underlying tension. Hazel, sweetheart, thank you for coming, Eleanor said, reaching for my hand across the table. I've been so worried about this rift between us. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe reconciliation was possible. Perhaps Eleanor had reflected on our agreement, or Brian had reconsidered his position. That sliver of optimism lasted exactly until the appetizers arrived. So, Eleanor began, arranging her napkin meticulously. We've been doing some thinking about the house situation.
I'm glad, I replied cautiously.
I'd really like to resolve this. Brian leaned forward, his expression serious. We appreciate everything you've done, Hazel. But Mom shouldn't have to give up her home just because you helped with some bills. Some bills. The familiar frustration bubbled up. I've sent over $50,000 at this point, money that was specifically tied to an agreement about the house. An agreement made under duress, Kenneth interjected smoothly. Eleanor was in a vulnerable position, not thinking clearly due to stress and health concerns. I stared at him incredulously. You weren't even in the picture when this arrangement was made. And Mom was thinking clearly enough to accept monthly payments for 2 years without complaint. The point is, Eleanor continued as if I hadn't spoken, we've come up with a compromise. We'll pay you back when we can, but the house stays in my name. When you can, I repeated. With what income? The debts are barely manageable even with my help. Brian's expression darkened. Actually, we have plans that don't involve your controlling input. Kenneth has connections in Florida real estate. We're considering selling the house and moving south, where the cost of living is lower. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just refusing to honor our agreement. They were planning to sell the very asset I'd been essentially purchasing in installments. You'd sell the house? I managed to ask, my voice barely audible over the restaurant's ambient noise. After everything I've done to save it? It's Mom's house to sell, Brian countered. Your financial assistance doesn't give you ownership rights. Eleanor at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. We give you something from the sale proceeds, of course. To acknowledge your help. Something? I repeated. What exactly does that mean? Kenneth stepped in with the confidence of someone accustomed to negotiating unfair deals. A percentage to be determined based on the final sale price and remaining obligations. Perhaps 10% as a gesture of gratitude. 10%. After 2 years of monthly payments totaling over $50,000. After postponing my own life goals. After the emotional investment in saving my childhood home. They were offering me 10% of a sale that wouldn't even be happening if not for my financial intervention. You know what the worst part is? I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded despite the turmoil inside. It's not even the money. It's that you've been planning this behind my back while accepting my help. It's the dishonesty, the manipulation. Brian scoffed, reaching for another breadstick. Always so dramatic, Hazel. This is why you've always been so difficult to deal with. Everything's a personal attack with you. Difficult to deal with? I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay composed. I'm difficult because I expect agreements to be honored? Because I don't want to be exploited by my own family? Exploited? Brian's voice matched mine in volume. You're the one trying to steal Mom's house. Using her financial vulnerability to your advantage makes you the worst sister ever. At least I've been here for her emotionally instead of just throwing money at the problem from a distance. The restaurant had grown quieter, other diners casting uncomfortable glances our way. Eleanor, always conscious of appearances, placed a restraining hand on Brian's arm. "Please, let's not make a scene," she whispered urgently. But something had broken loose inside me. Years of accommodating, of accepting less, of believing that family obligation trumped self-respect. "No, let's be honest for once," I insisted. "Brian has been financially dependent on you his entire adult life. He's never held a job longer than 6 months. He's never paid a single dollar toward the mortgage or property taxes on the house he claims to care so much about. And now he's positioned himself as your protector against me, the only person who's actually been solving the financial crisis instead of making it worse." Eleanor's expression hardened into something I'd never seen directed at me before. Pure, cold anger. "That's enough, Hazel," she snapped. "You don't get to speak about your brother that way. Not everything in life is about money and success. Brian has been my emotional support through all of this. What have you been except a distant voice on the phone with a calculator?" The injustice of it, the complete rewriting of reality, left me momentarily speechless. Into that silence, Eleanor delivered the final blow. "Maybe it would be better if you stopped sending money altogether. We'll manage without your help and your judgments. I won't have my children fighting like this, especially when one of them is being such a spoiled brat."
Spoiled brat.
The words echoed in my head as I sat frozen in place. After everything, the sacrifice, the support, the genuine concern, this was how she saw me. Not as the responsible daughter who had stepped up when needed, but as a selfish child throwing a tantrum. "I see," I finally said, gathering my purse and jacket. "Then I won't bother you with my help anymore." As I stood to leave, Brian couldn't resist a parting shot. "Don't let the door hit you on the way out of our lives." The drive back to my hotel was a blur of tears and disbelief. When I finally called Travis, his immediate response was to drive the 3 hours from Chicago to be with me. It was while waiting for him that I broke down completely in my hotel room, the full weight of the betrayal finally landing. The following day, back at work in Chicago, I found myself unable to focus on client portfolios or investment strategies. During a scheduled break, I ended up in Patricia's office again, this time with a more direct question. "Have you ever cut ties with family members?" I asked without preamble. Patricia regarded me thoughtfully.
Yes.
"My father, for nearly a decade. Sometimes separation is the only healthy option when relationships become toxic." "How did you know when it was time?" "When I realized I was being mistreated in ways I would never tolerate from anyone else," she replied simply. "Families shouldn't get a pass on basic respect and decency just because they're family." That evening, Travis helped me see what I had been unable or unwilling to acknowledge. I had been financially abused by the people who should have been most grateful for my help. "They've been gaslighting you," he explained gently, "making you question your memory of the agreement, your motives, even your worth as a daughter and sister. And they've been doing it specifically to keep the money flowing while avoiding their end of the bargain." A call to Raymond confirmed what I already suspected. Without written documentation specifying that my payments were conditional on receiving the house, I had little legal recourse to recover the money already sent. "Technically, they've been gifts in the eyes of the law," Raymond explained. "But before you give up entirely, bring me all communication you've had about this arrangement. Emails, texts, even notes from phone calls. Sometimes there's leverage we can find in the details." As I hung up, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time to start fighting for myself with the same dedication I'd shown in fighting for everyone else. The day after the disastrous dinner, I took a personal day from work and spread every piece of financial documentation related to Eleanor across my living room floor. Bank statements showing transfers. Emails discussing payment allocations. Text messages confirming receipt of funds. It created a paper trail of sorts, but Raymond had been clear. Without explicit language stating these were payments toward purchasing the house, they would likely be considered gifts. As I sorted through old emails, a forgotten attachment caught my attention. 3 years earlier, before our current arrangement began, Eleanor had experienced a previous financial crisis, smaller in scale but similar in nature. She had asked for a loan of $8,000 to prevent a vehicle repossession. Being more cautious then, I had insisted on a simple loan document that we both signed, which included a clause about right of first refusal if she ever decided to sell the house. It wasn't a deed transfer agreement, but it was something, a legally signed document acknowledging that my financial assistance created a specific interest in the property. I immediately forwarded the document to Raymond, who called back within the hour. "This changes things," he said, an undercurrent of excitement in his voice. "This establishes that your financial assistance wasn't just familial support, but was explicitly connected to an interest in the property. And the right of first refusal gives us leverage, especially since they're planning to sell." Over the next week, Raymond and I developed a strategic approach. First, we compiled a complete financial record showing every dollar sent to Eleanor over the past 2 years, with documentation of how each payment was applied to her debts. The total was staggering, nearly $60,000 at that point. Second, we drafted a formal letter outlining 2 options. Either return the entire amount plus reasonable interest, or proceed with transferring the deed as originally agreed. The letter referenced the prior loan document and its right of first refusal clause as evidence of an established pattern linking my financial support to the property. Finally, we prepared for the confrontation itself. Raymond advised against bringing him in person, suggesting it might escalate tensions unnecessarily. Instead, he helped me rehearse key talking points and potential responses to the emotional manipulation I was likely to face. "Remember," he counseled, "this isn't about being vindictive. It's about asserting your rights and holding them to the agreement they made and benefited from." The following Saturday, I arrived at the house unannounced, letter in hand. Eleanor answered the door, her initial surprise quickly morphing into wariness. "Hazel, we weren't expecting you." "I know," I replied calmly. "May I come in? We need to talk." The living room, newly furnished with items my money had indirectly funded, felt like foreign territory. Brian and Kenneth were apparently out, a small mercy that would allow for a more direct conversation with Eleanor. "I've been doing some thinking," I began, maintaining the professional demeanor I used with difficult clients, "about our arrangement and how we move forward." Eleanor's posture stiffened. "There's nothing to discuss. We've made our decision." "Actually, there is," I countered, handing her the letter. "These are your options moving forward. Either repay the $60,000 I've provided over the past 2 years, with interest, or proceed with transferring the deed as we originally agreed." She skimmed the document, her expression shifting from dismissive to concerned. "This is ridiculous. You can't legally force me to do either." "Actually, I can," I replied, pointing to the reference loan document. "This establishes a clear precedent that my financial support was connected to an interest in the property, and your emails acknowledging our verbal agreement further strengthen my position." I watched as Eleanor's confidence wavered. She had expected me to continue the emotional pleading of our previous interactions, not this calm, legally informed approach. "Brian won't allow this," she said finally, a last attempt at leveraging my lifetime of giving in to avoid conflict. "Brian isn't on the deed," I pointed out. "This is between you and me. And while I'd prefer to resolve this amicably, I'm prepared to pursue legal action if necessary." The threat of public legal proceedings, something Eleanor had always feared more than almost anything, visibly rattled her. "I need time to think," she stammered, "to discuss this with Kenneth." "Of course," I agreed reasonably. "You have 1 week to decide which option you prefer. After that, my lawyer will proceed accordingly." As I turned to leave, Eleanor called after me, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "When did you become so cold, Hazel? So businesslike with your own mother?" I paused at the door, considering my response carefully. "I learned it from watching you and Brian calculate exactly how much emotional manipulation was needed to keep the money flowing while giving nothing in return. The difference is, I'm being transparent about my terms." The week that followed brought exactly the response Raymond had predicted. First came angry calls from Brian, full of threats and accusations. Then attempts at emotional manipulation from Eleanor, reminiscences about my childhood, and questions about whether I really wanted to tear the family apart. Finally, as the deadline approached, came grudging engagement with the actual options presented. Kenneth, revealing his true colors when faced with potential financial implications, encouraged Eleanor to cut losses and move on. Brian, suddenly concerned about his own living situation, began floating compromise suggestions that still somehow benefited him most of all. 2 days before the deadline, Eleanor called with her decision. "I'll transfer the deed," she said flatly. "But I want it in writing that Brian and I can continue living here for at least 6 months while we make other arrangements." It was a reasonable request, and one I had anticipated. "I'll have Raymond draw up a formal agreement. We can meet at his office tomorrow to sign everything." The following day, seated in Raymond's tastefully appointed conference room, I watched as Eleanor signed the deed transfer documents with visible reluctance. Raymond had structured the agreement to include a 6-month grace period during which Eleanor and Brian could continue living in the house without rent, with the understanding that they would vacate the property completely at the end of that period. "Congratulations," Raymond said quietly as we watched Eleanor leave the office. "You handled this perfectly." But perfect wasn't how it felt.
Necessary, yes. Just certainly.
But the victory was hollow, tainted by the knowledge that it had taken legal leverage to force my own mother to honor her word. That evening, when I called to check that Eleanor had arrived home safely, Brian answered instead. "Happy now?" he asked bitterly. "You've got what you wanted. Mom's been crying all afternoon." "I didn't want it this way," I replied truthfully. "I wanted her to honor our agreement willingly, out of integrity." "Save the sanctimonious bullshit," he snapped. "Just know that as far as we're concerned, you're no longer welcome here. You may own the house now, but until we're forced to leave, don't bother visiting." The formal eviction notice came the next day, not from me, but from Eleanor and Brian to me. A certified letter demanding that I cease all attempts to enter the premises until the 6-month period had elapsed, effectively banning me from the property I now legally owned. It was the final irony in a situation overflowing with them. I had saved the house only to be barred from it, preserved my childhood home only to have it explicitly rejected as my home by the very people I'd try to help. Yet as I placed the letter in my growing file of documentation, I felt something unexpected: relief. The battle was over. The manipulation had failed. For the first time in my adult life, I had held firm against the emotional tactics that had controlled me for so long. I was no longer the family doormat, and that realization was worth more than any property deed. 6 months passed quickly. During that time, I received no calls from Eleanor or Brian, though Raymond occasionally updated me on their compliance with the agreement terms. According to him, they had begun looking at apartments in Florida, apparently still planning to relocate despite the change in circumstances. On moving day, exactly 6 months from the deed transfer, I arrived at the house early, parking across the street to avoid immediate confrontation. A small moving truck was already in the driveway, being loaded with furniture and boxes under Brian's supervision. Eleanor sat on the front porch swing, looking smaller somehow, diminished by circumstances of her own creation. When they noticed my car, Brian's expression hardened into familiar hostility. Eleanor simply looked away, unable or unwilling to make eye contact. Neither approached me as I finally exited my vehicle and walked toward the property that was now legally mine. "Keys?" I asked simply when I reached the porch. Eleanor handed them over wordlessly, her fingers lingering for just a moment on the familiar keychain, a small silver heart my father had given her decades ago. "The utilities have been disconnected as of today," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "As requested." I nodded. "Thank you. Is there anything else we need to address before you leave?" The formality between us felt strange, but necessary, a boundary established after a lifetime of blurred lines and one-sided expectations. "Just one thing," Brian interjected, stepping onto the porch. "You got what you wanted. The house. But you lost your family in the process." Was it worth it? The question was designed to provoke guilt, to cast me as the villain in their narrative. 6 months earlier, it might have worked. But I had spent the intervening time in intensive therapy, unpacking the patterns of emotional manipulation that had shaped our family dynamics for decades. What I wanted, I replied calmly, was for agreements to be honored, for my contributions to be respected, for my boundaries to be acknowledged. The house was never the primary issue, it was the principle. Brian scoffed, but I continued before he could interrupt. And regarding family, real family doesn't exploit each other, doesn't manipulate, doesn't take without giving. So I haven't lost family. I've simply recognized what we never truly had. Eleanor flinched at this, her eyes finally meeting mine. Is that really how you see us? As exploiters? Actions speak louder than words, I replied simply. Your actions made it clear how you valued me, as a financial resource, not as a daughter. The moving truck horn sounded, a merciful interruption to a conversation that could have no satisfying conclusion. Kenneth waved impatiently from the driver's seat, eager to be on the road. We should go, Eleanor said quietly, gathering her purse and the small carry-on at her feet. The apartment is expecting us by evening. As they prepared to leave, I found myself smiling, not from vindictiveness or triumph, but from the profound sense of peace that comes with standing firmly in your own truth. When Eleanor noticed, her expression registered confusion. You're smiling?
Now.
Yes, I admitted. Because for the first time in my adult life, I'm not measuring my worth by your approval. And that feels like freedom. They left without further conversation, the moving truck pulling away from the curb as I stood in the driveway of my childhood home, now truly mine in more ways than one. The months that followed brought unexpected developments. The house, while full of complicated memories, represented significant equity. After careful consideration, I decided to renovate it into a duplex, living in one unit while renting the other to generate income. Travis supported the decision, even helping with some of the cosmetic updates despite his initial reservations about remaining so connected to the property. It's different now, I explained as we painted the living room in fresh, bright colors. Before, this house represented obligation and emotional baggage. Now it's an asset I've rightfully earned, a symbol of standing up for myself. 3 months after moving day, I received an unexpected call from Brian. Kenneth, it turned out, had left Eleanor shortly after their move to Florida, his interest apparently waning once the potential financial benefit of the house sale disappeared. Eleanor was struggling to afford their apartment on her limited income, and Brian's latest job had already ended. We're not asking for money, he clarified quickly, an unusual note of humility in his voice. Just advice. You were right about a lot of things, and we're trying to figure out next steps. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to ever receive. After consultation with Travis and my therapist, I agreed to limited contact, financial advice only, with clear boundaries around emotional engagement. I can help you create a sustainable budget, I offered during our first video call. But I won't be sending money, and I won't tolerate manipulation tactics. Those days are over. Eleanor, looking noticeably older on the screen, nodded acceptance. That's fair. More than fair, considering everything. Rebuilding trust has been a slow, often uncertain process. There are still moments when old patterns emerge, Brian's subtle guilt trips, Eleanor's attempts at emotional leverage. But now I recognize these tactics immediately and address them directly, refusing to be drawn back into unhealthy dynamics. 6 months after the move, Travis proposed. We held a small ceremony in the backyard of the duplex, a deliberate choice to reclaim the space with new, positive memories. Eleanor and Brian were not invited, a decision that caused pain but reinforced necessary boundaries. Family isn't just about blood, Travis reminded me on our wedding day. It's about mutual respect, support, and love. We're building our own family now, one based on healthier foundations. The journey from financial doormat to self-respecting adult has been the most challenging and rewarding transformation of my life. I've learned that love without boundaries isn't really love, it's exploitation. That helping others should never require diminishing yourself. That sometimes the strongest families are the ones we choose, not the ones we're born into. Most importantly, I've learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for genuine relationships. By finally saying no to exploitation, I open the door to authentic connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. Today, as I sit in the garden of the home I truly earned, I no longer measure my worth by others' approval. The deed to this house represents more than property ownership. It symbolizes reclaiming the deed to my own life, my own choices, my own boundaries. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between family obligations and self-respect? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with those closest to us, but as this journey taught me, they're often the most necessary. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. Thank you for being part of this healing journey, and remember, real love never requires you to diminish yourself.